something is terribly wrong. I'm in behind the motorcade trying to follow them. It looks as though they're going to Parkland Hospital. We're on the road to Parkland at this time.
I was at work at the Republic National Life Insurance Company, North Central Expressway, Dallas, and it was announced over the PA that the president had been shot, and the initial response of my co-workers was one of some jubilation. I mean, there was, clapping to be heard and people shouting, because he was not a popular man, of course, in Texas, because he threatened the oil revenues on which the wealth of the state appeared to float. And I know that the reaction in the high school where my girlfriend was, in theory, studying at the time, was very similar. I mean, it was announced there by the headmaster, or whatever they call him, and cheering broke out fairly generally. So I ran out into the car park and jumped into my car and drove into downtown Dallas. And I parked up somewhere and approached the police cordon. And I told them I was from the Liverpool Echo, which obviously I wasn't, and I didn't have any kind of press passes or anything at all. But just because I had an English accent, they assumed I must be telling the truth, rather touchingly. And so I went through the cordon and went and had a look and see what was going on down by the famous grassy knoll, etc.
And just now we've received reports here at Parkland that Governor Connolly was shot in the upper left chest, and the first unconfirmed reports say the president was hit in the head.
My obsession was the radio, so I went up and switched on, and one of my favourite radio stations were doing a live transmission from Dallas, Texas on the President Kennedy visit, and I thought I had heard the announcer saying that a shot had been fired, and I seem to remember saying, my God, I think President Kennedy's been assassinated.
There's only one word to describe the picture here, and that's grief, and much of it. It's official. As of just a few moments ago, the President of the United States is dead.
In Britain, Granada's nightly magazine programme broke the news to viewers in the north. But compared with the high tech of today, production methods were primitive.
There was a film segment of something, witty or something. I was sitting waiting for that film to come to an end. And suddenly a floor manager sort of scrabbled across the floor, and it was coming to the end of the film. I thought, what on earth? And he thrust a piece of paper in my hand. And he said, JFK has been shot, tell them. And I said, but I said, how do I know? He said, tell them. And he said, 10 seconds, and I was absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe it.
When you walk through a storm.
The television weekend had just begun. On ITV elsewhere in the country, the #1 pop music show.
We were doing Ready, Steady, Go in London, and suddenly it came a news flash that John F. Kennedy had been shot. And we hadn't been on yet, we were ready to go on. It just sort of gobsmacked me, what? Immediately I thought, World War III, he's been shot by the Russians, H-bombs, we are dead. And the guy came in and said, come on, you're on, Jerry, to do Walk Alone. And I said, Kennedy's been shot. Yes, he said, but get on, you've got to do Walk Alone. And I went on the stage and thought, this might be the last time I ever sing on telly.
BBC Television, the time is 7:05.
The news of the assassination attempt came through in the middle of the Tonight programme. Cliff Mitchell-Moore gave the news, and then Tonight closed down. This was the night of the BAFTA Awards, and the whole of the television industry was at the Dorchester Hotel celebrating the awards.
We were going to collect an award for the first series of That Was the Week That Was, and I remember I heard it exactly at the moment that I went through the door of the Dorchester and somebody said, Kennedy's been shot. I think that must have been about 7 o'clock.
I, with a lot of colleagues from BBC and ITV, was at the Dorchester Hotel, and Reggie Bosanquet came straight towards me. I looked at him and said, Reggie, what on earth's the matter? And he said, Kennedy has been shot, and I think he's dead. And it was like a hot knife going through you. It was unbelievable. And of course the news spread like wildfire around the room, and what should have been a happy awards ceremony evening turned into almost a wake. And then Geoffrey Cox, the then editor of ITN, looked across at me and said, come on, Andrew, I think we ought to go back to the shop. And that's what we did.
There were just 2 channels, BBC and ITV. And on both, hugely popular programmes were scheduled.
The BBC had made an ass of himself on this particular night because they had gone off the air immediately. And when I saw they were off the air, I said, we can't go on with emergency war, they're off the air, you see. They saw us still on the air, so they put back Harry Worth. We went off, and they were stuck. They couldn't go off again. Everyone's gone on and brought their program back. So they got a lot of bad criticism the next day.
I went back, first of all, to the television centre to see what was happening there, and a lot of people were drunk in the gallery, I remember. They were all very emotional. I remember Grace Wyndham Goldie, who was probably more drunk than the others, saying, "News has let us down! News has let us down!" And she kept saying.
Newspapers had not yet been upstaged in handling breaking stories by satellite television. With their soon-to-be outdated technology, each paper was determined, like the Daily Express, then based in the heart of Fleet Street, to give the best coverage of the Dallas tragedy.
I went to the foreign desk and I found a scene of amazing confusion and tension. Now, I had given up smoking that day. I gave up smoking fairly frequently. So at the moment that I heard that Kennedy was dead, I took off my coat and I sent my secretary out for 3 packets of cigarettes.
It really did hit me that we were tackling one of the big stories of the century, and totally unexpected, which to a newspaperman is, you'll not misunderstand me, the best kind of story, like the Titanic. Totally unexpected, dramatic. And we had to do it better than all the other papers. And if we didn't, I knew I'd hear from Lord Beetlebrook. And then the whole enormous process of producing the paper began.
Ross Mark, our Washington correspondent, going on shooting bear in the mountains. And Rennie McCall, who was our chief foreign correspondent, was in Central America. So I was then left with George Gale, who was a great colour writer. But George was spending his day off mostly in Elvino. And I had Gale brought back to the office. And it became obvious to me that Gale was not really in the right spirit to write 1,000 words about the tragedy of John Kennedy. And I went to see him about 15 minutes later, and his head was in his typewriter, and around him were about a dozen sheets of paper, each of which contained half a sentence. So I thought, my God, it's up to me. And I then got on my typewriter, opened the cigarettes, and wrote the leader page.
8, 7, 6.
Right, stand by, everyone.
4,
Television news had few of today's resources,
2 grams and take it.
but plenty of adrenaline.
I went on to do the 9 o'clock news with about half an hour's warning. And of course the news was breaking all the time. It was a moment of great tension, great excitement in the news sense. And then did several news flashes for the network after that, right through till close down, which I think in those days was about 11:45.
Well, it seemed to be an incredible moment to everybody, because I've never known anybody that affected people so much as Kennedy. Everybody remembers where they were at that time. You ask somebody, where were you when Kennedy was shot? And they all remember. It's an amazing moment in history.
I was on my way home from the studios at Lion Grove, and I had the wireless on, and I heard this announcement, which was breaking into whatever program was on, that he'd been shot. And I remember as I heard those words, I said aloud, I was quite alone in the car, I said aloud, "Oh no, oh no."
I was with my ex-wife in a West End cinema when I became aware of something going on behind me, and I turned round and I could see people in the back row of the balcony chatting busily to each other and then talking to the people in the row in front of them. And I guessed something pretty dreadful had happened. And you know the way today at football matches people create